Adam Schiff is a vegan. Some of my favorite people are doing that. Snoop Dogg, the rapper, just came out with a vegan hot dog. And it's becoming cool to eat a plant-based diet. The signs are everywhere. This is a trend, a wave that hasn't even begun to crest.
Dr. Dean Ornish, physician, best-selling author, and founder of the Preventive Medicine Research Institute, is known as the father of lifestyle medicine, showing how simple changes in diet, exercise, and stress can prevent disease.
Were there any prescriptions you'd give to the government in terms of our maybe culture as a whole so that we can systemically change the way we look at health?
There are now 8 randomized trials that show that stents and angioplasties in stable patients don't work. They're dangerous, invasive, expensive, and largely ineffective. And yet something as simple as lifestyle changes can actually not only prevent but even reverse a disease at a fraction of the cost.
What would be the difference in a gene expression from a meal of a sweet potato and a blueberry versus a cheeseburger?
These are the genes that cause prostate cancer, colon cancer, breast cancer.
Have you seen change? And how much hope do we have for all the work that you've done, 43 years of it?
I see a lot of hope here, and I think that
all right, everyone out there, welcome to the Switch for Good podcast. We are really, really stoked to be here with you today. I'm Dotsie, and I'm alongside Alexandra. And our next guest really needs no introduction. You know him as the father of lifestyle medicine. For over 43 years, he has directed clinical research demonstrating for the first time that comprehensive lifestyle changes may begin to reverse even severe coronary heart disease without drugs or surgery. His work is so powerful that Medicare even created a new benefit category, intensive cardiac rehabilitation, to provide coverage for this program. He directed the first randomized controlled trial demonstrating that comprehensive lifestyle changes may slow, stop, or reverse the progression of early stage prostate cancer. His research has also taught us that comprehensive lifestyle changes affect gene expression, turning on disease-preventing genes and turning off genes that promote cancer and heart disease. And he is currently directing the very first randomized controlled trial to determine if comprehensive lifestyle changes may reverse the progression of early Alzheimer's disease. His resume continues with 7 best-selling books and 3 TEDx talks, which have been viewed by over 7 million people. And Forbes magazine named him as one of the world's 7 most powerful teachers. His latest book, written alongside his wife, Anne, is called Undo It. And we're going to focus on the 4 main lifestyle changes they speak passionately about in the book. Eat well, move more, stress less, and love more. I first met Dr. Dean at the Sundance Film Festival when the Game Changers film was released. I found him to be kind, self-effacing, intriguing, and funny. And his wife, wow, she is something special. And I asked her if she would be my new BFF, but she said we could discuss it. So
actually, I think she would love that.
Okay, good. It's done.
She's going to have to fight me, though. She's going to have to.
we can have a triad. Okay, so we are going to dive in because honestly, we have so much to learn and so much to be hopeful for as Dr. Dean Ornish takes us on a ride to optimum health and happiness. So welcome, Dr. Dean, to the podcast.
It's so great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. Well, we have 1 million questions, 1,000,001 to be exact. But, as I was researching, I really, there's not much about little Dr. Dean, little Dean before he was a doctor. So I'd love to start with what style of upbringing did you have? And at what age were you? And how did that, I guess you could call it kind of that aha moment happen in the case of food and how it functions in our body to heal and mitigate disease?
Okay. Well, I grew up in Texas long ago in a galaxy far away. The typical Texas diet of cheeseburgers and chilies and chalupas and, meat 4 or 5 times a day. But what really transformed my life was when I got suicidally depressed when I was in college. I was at Rice University in Houston, and half the student body, graduated first or second in their high school class. And I felt like I was really stupid and somehow I'd managed to fool the admissions committee to thinking that I was smart. And now that I was with a bunch of really smart kids, it was just a matter of time before they, figured out what a big mistake they'd made in letting me in. But I also had what I can only describe as a spiritual crisis, which was that I had this direct understanding that nothing external can really bring lasting happiness. And so the combination of feeling like I was never going to amount to anything because I was stupid, and even if I did, it wouldn't matter. I began to feel like, who cares? Why bother? So what? Nothing matters. Just took all the meaning out of everything. And I thought, why don't I just kill myself? I remember sitting in organic chemistry class one day thinking, dead people look like they're peaceful. And I was so agitated that I couldn't even sit still. I went for a week straight without sleeping, which is enough to make anyone crazy. I couldn't read a headline in a newspaper and tell you 5 minutes later what it said. And I was all set to do that. But what saved me was that I ran myself down so ragged that I got a really severe case of infectious mononucleosis to the point I literally couldn't get out of bed. My parents got wind that all was not well with their son, so they came down and saw what a wreck I was. And I went back to Dallas with them. My secret plan was to get strong enough to kill myself, as crazy as that sounds. This was in January of 1973. Meanwhile, my older sister, who had been kind of a child of the 60s, had really benefited from studying with an ecumenical spiritual teacher named Swami Satchidananda. He opened Woodstock, by the way, just was one of how he first became well known. And so they decided they were going to have a cocktail party for the Swami because he'd really helped my sister a lot. And you can only imagine in Dallas in 1973 how weird that was. I mean, today it would be weird, but especially back then, almost 50 years ago. And so in walks this central castings idea of what a Swami should look like. Long saffron robes and long white beard, and look like. There's an old saying that when the student is ready, the teacher appears, and that was certainly true for me. And so he came into our living room and began to give a satsang, a lecture. And he started off by saying, nothing can bring you lasting happiness, which I'd already figured out, except I was ready to do myself in, and he was glowing. And I'm thinking, like, what am I missing here? And he went on to say what probably sounds to many people like a new age cliche, but it really turned my life around, which is that while nothing can bring lasting happiness, the good news is that it's our nature to be happy and healthy until we disturb that. There are a few genetic exceptions, but for the 99.9% of the time, we are healthy already, we're happy already until we disturb that. And not being mindful of that, and what may be the ultimate irony, we think, gosh, I must be lacking something. If only I had more whatever, more money, usually more power, more sex, more beauty, more accomplishment, whatever, then I'd be happy. Then people would like me. Then I wouldn't feel so lonely and isolated. And what I learned from him is that, in the whole advertising industry, for example, reinforces that view of the world. You have a sense of lack. You have to get something outside you to be happy and healthy. And once you set up that view of the world, as I learned from him, however it turns out, you feel bad because until you get it, whatever that is, you feel stressful. Boy, I hope I get it. And we know that stress comes not just from what you do, but how you perceive the world and how you react to what you do. So the stakes go up because it's not just winning or losing, it's being a winner or a loser. And if you're a loser, you're going to be miserable and lonely. And if you're a winner, people are going to love you and you'll feel great. So the stakes go up, the stresses go up. And so until you get it, it's really stressful. If someone else gets it and you don't, then it really reinforces this sense of lacking and this kind of zero-sum game view of the world. The more you get, the less there is for me, and you only go around once and you better get it while you can, kind of the beer commercial way of looking at the world. And if you don't, and if you do get it, there's this moment of like, this is great, I'm happy, but invariably it doesn't last. It's soon followed by either now what. One of the patients in one of my studies later said, I can't even enjoy the view from the mountain I've climbed. I'm already looking over the next one. It's never enough. I mean, how many times have we said, Josh, if I just made $10,000 a year, that would do it, And then it was like, well, maybe 30,000 would be a little better. It's just the goalposts keep moving. Or it's not now what, it's often so what. Big deal. It doesn't really provide that lasting meaning that I thought it would. Another patient said, the letdown that comes from accomplishing a goal is so great that I always make sure that I've got a dozen projects going at the same time. I mean, as an Olympic medalist, so many of your colleagues have written books about how once they actually achieve that goal, how, I think it wasn't Bjorn Borg, it was one of the tennis players who married Steffi Graf.
Oh, Andre Agassi's
Andre
book.
Agassi, wrote a
Yeah.
book about the same kind of thing, that it's either now what or so what. And so it's like, well, maybe this didn't do, maybe that will. And so the cycle continues. So what he said is that the goal of all these spiritual practices, meditation, for example, is that, the ancient swamis or rabbis or priests or monks or nuns or mullahs or whatever didn't discover meditation, for example, to perform better in sports. It can certainly help you do that, or to perform better in school, or to unclog your arteries or lower your blood pressure, all those things. It can certainly do all those things and help do all those things. They're actually powerful tools for transformation, for quieting down our mind and body so that we can experience more of an inner sense of peace and joy and well-being, and to realize that the meditation didn't bring you that sense of peace and well-being, but rather it was there already. What it did was to help stop disturbing what was there already. And so then the question shifts from how can I get what I think I need to be happy and healthy and lovable, to how can I stop disturbing what's there already? And that's really important. That may sound like, semantic parsing of words, but the implications are quite profound, because if it's out there, then everyone who has what I think I need has power over me to be healthy and happy. But if it's me, not to blame myself, but to empower myself, I can do something about that. And then it becomes like, okay, what am I doing that's disturbing my health? And I can change that, as opposed to how can I get something that's external to me? So instead of feeling like I had to go to medical school and get into, to be lovable and happy and healthy, I decided I was that way already. I could experience that. It's not a concept that you can argue about. It's like, I remember it was, who was it? Jonas Salk said, I don't have faith, I have experience. You have the direct experience that, oh, when I'm feeling more peaceful, then I know that's true. And then I can go out in the world, paradoxically, and accomplish even more without the stresses and the anxiety that goes along with thinking like, oh, I have to do this because so much is at stake. So I went back to school, transferred to the University of Texas at Austin, graduated first in my class, gave the baccalaureate. And I say that not to brag, but to say I experienced both ends of that spectrum. On the one hand, I felt like a total loser, total failure. I just wanted to do myself in. I love watching It's a Wonderful Life, that wonderful Jimmy Stewart movie, because I can really, relate to that, like what the world would have been like if, I think if there's a hell, it would have been seeing what my life could have been like, and my wife, Anne, that you mentioned, and our two kids, and, all those wonderful things that I would have missed out on. I really think that, when you kill yourself, you lose your body, but you're still you just have a different form. Anyway, so when I went to medical school, I was learning how to do coronary bypass surgery with Dr. Michael DeBakey, who was one of the people who invented the operation. And, we'd cut people open, we'd bypass their clogged arteries, he'd tell them they were cured. And more often than not, they'd go home and do the same things that had caused the problem in the first place, smoke cigarettes, eat junk food, not manage stress, not exercise, etc. And then we cut them open again, sometimes 2 or 3 times. And so for me, that became the metaphor of what was wrong with traditional medicine. I mean, there's a lot right. I mean, we've all benefited from drugs and surgery that can be life-saving when used appropriately, but we weren't really treating the cause. We were only treating the symptoms. Later I had a cartoon drawn of doctors busily mopping up the floor around the sink that's overflowing, but nobody was turning off the faucet. It's like, when people get put on medications to lower their cholesterol or their blood pressure and their blood sugar, and say, doctor, how long do I have to take these? What does the doctor usually say? Like, forever, right? It's like, how long do I have to mop up this floor? Like, forever. Like, well, why don't we turn off the faucet? Why don't we treat the cause? And the cause, more often than not, are the lifestyle choices that we make each day. And over years, 40 years now, 43 years, we've used these very high-tech, expensive, state-of-the-art scientific measures to prove how powerful these very simple and low-tech and low-cost interventions can be. And I think the biggest obstacle I find is people think, oh, diet and lifestyle, that's kind of boring. It has to be a new drug, a new laser, a new device, something really high-tech and expensive to be powerful. And we've been able to show how powerful these simple changes are. So I decided to go to these places that used to call libraries, and these things called books, that you could, check out. And I began to read, and dogs and cats and pigs and rabbits and monkeys, you could cause them to get heart disease if you made them smoke or put them on typical American diet or made them sedentary or put them in isolation. And you could reverse it if you change those things. I said, why should people be any different? And Dr. DeBakey was kind of merciless. He was really old school. He was the kind of guy who would stick your fingers if you didn't move them quickly enough out of the operating field and so on. In fact, by the way, he'd say like, he said, "What year are you, son?" I'd say, "I'm starting my third year." He goes, "Damn, it's going to be so much harder to bust you out of here now with all these weird ideas you have." And he called me actually about, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago at the age of 99. I hadn't heard from him in literally decades. And he said, "Hey, Dean, this is Mike DeBakey." And he had a very distinctive Louisiana accent. So I recognized it immediately, although I hadn't heard him literally in decades. And I said, "To what do I owe this great honor?" He said, "Well, you know those ideas that I used to give you such a hard time about when you were my medical student?" I said, "Oh, yeah, I remember very well." He goes, "That's what's kept me alive all these years." He said, "I'm 99 years old. I'm about to die. I just wanted you to, I thought you'd like to know that." He said, "My wife got interested in your approach. And so it's really helped me out a lot." So if you live long enough, you just never know. It's kind of given me a longer event horizon about how change can sometimes, take decades, not just, weeks or years. But anyway, and so I decided to take a year off between my second and third years of medical school, much to my parents' dismay. And there's something nice about not being fully indoctrinated about what's possible and what's not possible. And so I didn't know enough to know what's not possible. Fools rush in and all that. And so I went to every hotel in Houston and found one, the Plaza, that donated 10 of its rooms to us for a month. And the chief of cardiology and the chief of medicine. One of the nice things about going to medical school in Texas at Baylor College of Medicine was that there is this really pioneering ethos there. It's like, you got this weird idea, go for it. It may not work, but you'll learn something, so we'll support it. When I went to Harvard later, it was like, you can't do anything till like you're 40 and, worked in someone else's lab for 10 years. But anyway, and so I put 10 men and women who had really bad heart disease in this hotel for a month, and they got better. And they not only felt better, 8 of the 10 people, their chest pain went away. They were better in ways. We actually had a test, which was a new test at the time, that measured, called a thallium scan, that measured blood flow to the heart. And we showed that 8 of the 10 people showed improved blood flow to the heart. And I showed this to the doctors and I said, "Hey, isn't this wonderful?" They said, "Oh, well, that must not be you. The test must be wrong." I said, "What do you mean the test? But you did the test. These are the same tests we send people to bypass surgery with every day. Why are they suddenly not working?" "Well, you didn't have a randomized control group for comparison. How do you know they wouldn't have gotten better anyway?" I said, "Well, technically that's true, but have you ever seen any patients get better like this?" "Well, no, but that's beside the." Anyway, it was my first understanding that when you're doing something that's truly disruptive, that really challenges the conventional wisdom, it's often met with a lot of resistance. It's very threatening, not only threatening in the sense that people think, oh, drug companies and losing money, but it's really threatening in a much more primal way. The order that system provides kind of gets shaken a bit. So anyway, went back to school, finished medical school, then did a second study, took off another year. And this time we did have a randomized control group. We replicated those findings, published it in the Journal of the American Medical Association. Went to Harvard and Mass General to do my medical fellowship and residency, moved to San Francisco, began the third study, the most definitive one, called the Lifestyle Heart Trial, became a professor at UCSF and started the nonprofit Preventive Medicine Research Institute. And we use again, these state-of-the-art measures, quantitative arteriography to measure the amount of blockages in the arteries, very accurate and reproducible and precise, and cardiac PET scans, positron emission tomography, to measure how much blood flow the heart was getting. We actually flew our patients to Texas, the University of Texas, which had the best cardiac PET scanner at the time. Went to great lengths to do the study. And it was also my first real direct understanding that when you're doing something that's really disruptive, it's hard to get funding for it because there's a catch-22. People think like, why should we waste our money? We know it's impossible. And without the funding, you can't do the studies to show it's possible. And if they don't think it's possible, they don't want to fund it. So I said, look, and I'd raised some money from some people in Texas who were in the oil and gas and real estate development world. And at that time, oil plunged and the people couldn't make their pledges. And so they said, you just can't do the study. So I talked to my staff and I said, look, I don't know how we're going to raise the money, but if you're in, somehow I really have this mystical idea that if you're totally committed to something, somehow the universe, and you're doing good work, somehow the universe will provide. And we had to raise at that time about $50,000 every month. And sure enough, every month, no one ever missed a paycheck, I really think that's true. Anyway, so we found again that after 1 year, there was some reversal. The arteries became less clogged in the group that made these lifestyle changes, whereas they got more clogged in the comparison randomized control group, even though they were following the American Heart Association dietary guidelines, less red meat, 4 eggs a week, take the skin off the chicken, et cetera. That wasn't enough it slowed down the rate at which they got worse, but that was the best we thought you could do, was just to slow it down, not to stop or reverse it. We showed that ounce of prevention, pound of cure, if you will. That it's hard to reverse a chronic disease. That's why we showed it for the first time in a control study, because people didn't go far enough. And then we used that as after 1 year, we then were able to get a grant from the National Institutes of Health, from the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, to extend the study for 4 more years. And we found there was even more reversal after 5 years than after 1 year, but there was even more worsening after 5 years than after 1 year in the control group. And we published the 1-year findings in the Lancet, the International Premier Medical Journal, and the 5-year findings in the Journal of the AMA. And the PET scan findings, we found there was a 400% improvement in blood flow, which we also published as a separate paper in JAMA. And then over time, I thought, at the time I thought, well, now that'll just change medical practice. And to some degree it did, but not nearly as much as I'd hoped, because what I learned is that science is not the primary determinant of medical practice. Reimbursement is. And it's not that we doctors are only interested in money, but if you're trained to use just drugs and surgery, and you're reimbursed to use drugs and surgery, that's what you do. It's like, if the only tool you have is a hammer, you see everything is a nail. That we did I'm on the nutrition subcommittee working group of the American College of Cardiology. We published a paper a couple of years ago that the average doctor gets 4 hours a year of nutrition training, a year. And the average cardiology fellow in 4 years of fellowship gets it 0. So that's why doctors use drugs and surgery, because that's all they know. So I thought, if we could get Medicare to pay for this, there were some insurance companies, Mutual of Omaha and Highmark Blue Cross Blue Shield and some others covered it. But I thought if we get Medicare to do it, that would really be a game changer, because, we doctors do what we get paid to do, we get trained to do what we get paid to do. So if you change reimbursement, you change medical practice and even medical education. So I was working with Bill Clinton, still am, as one of his consulting doctors, but also with Newt Gingrich at the time, with one of his family members when he was Speaker of the House. So we had, both ends of the political spectrum, people who really did not like each other much at all. We had we ultimately had 30 members of Congress, from the most conservative Republicans, the most liberal Democrats, 15 to 20 senators, across the political spectrum, heads of the AARP, et cetera. And it took us 16 years. My persistence is probably my best and my worst quality. But after 16 years, they created a new benefit category, as you indicated, to cover our program. And that really was a game changer. And then now that Medicare is covering it, most of the other insurance companies are as well. That was in 2010. And so we've been with a company called ShareCare, where we've been training hospitals and clinics and physician groups around the country, and it's been working. We're getting bigger changes in lifestyle, better clinical outcomes, bigger cost savings. We're cutting costs in half in the first year, and better engagement than anyone's ever shown before, which has been exciting. And then we had another breakthrough in November, just a few months ago, when Medicare agreed to cover my reversing heart disease program when done virtually via Zoom. So now we can reach people wherever they live in the country, not just those living within driving distance of one of the hospitals or clinics we've trained. So that'll help reduce health disparities and health inequities, and enabled us to really reach people wherever they live, in rural areas or food deserts or whatever. So we're at a new era now. If people are interested in learning more about our work or signing up for the virtual program, just go to our website, ornish.com. So that was a rather long answer to your question.
No, it was fascinating. Thank you. I really appreciate it. We learned a lot in that, and I'm so happy to know about. Thank you, Dotsie, for asking that.
And then let me just add one thing, which is to me, this has all been kind of a conspiracy of love, if you will. That I feel like I've been I really literally came as close to killing myself as you can without actually doing it. And I know how dark those places can be. They're unspeakably dark. And so I have really directly experienced that. It gives me a lot of compassion, but also really freed me in a lot of ways, because just as I learned that I could take all the meaning out of life, I later learned that I could imbue my life with meaning. And one way of doing that is by doing things that help other people. Another is by choosing not to do certain things, choosing to be in a monogamous relationship, or choosing not to eat certain foods. People say, oh, that, you must feel so deprived, not eating all these foods. I'm sure you hear that all the time. But, there's a reason why all spiritual paths just about, have, religions have dietary guidelines. And, one, you can eat this, but not that, or certain days of the week, or certain months of the year, or certain times of day. And I think whatever the intrinsic benefit of eating or not eating certain foods, just the act of choosing not to eat something that you otherwise can eat makes those choices meaningful. Or being in a
Mhm.
monogamous
Yeah.
relationship, is that like the ball and chain? Well, it can be. Or is that, the crucible where you create this sacred space where you can only be intimate to the degree you feel you can be open your heart and be
Mhm.
vulnerable, and you can only do that to the degree you feel safe. So if you have people who are totally committed, they can open their hearts more and more. The more intimate it is, the more erotic it is, the more playful, the more fun, the more healing, all the things that really matter to
Mhm.
people. And so in all of these areas, what it comes down to is what you gain is so much more than what you give up, not just about preventing something
Mhm.
bad from happening years down the road. That's not sustainable. Fear is not really a sustainable motivator. I mean, for a month or two, it can really get your attention, but it's not sustainable.
Mhm.
What's sustainable are joy and pleasure and love and feeling good. And so for me, my work, and which is, I just, it gets me out of bed every day, is to feel like I can work with people who are suffering, just like I was. And when they're suffering,
Mhm.
there's an openness to change that you don't usually find because change is hard. But if you're hurting badly enough, and you can say to someone, look, here's something you can do that can make the pain, whether it's the chest pain, the angina, or the more deeper pain, the depression, or so on, that can really make a difference in how, because these underlying biological mechanisms are so dynamic, how quickly you can experience those benefits. And then
Mhm.
they come out of your own experience, not because some doctor or some book or some whatever told you, but like, oh, when I do this, I feel good. When I do that, I don't feel so good. So let me do more of this and less of that. That really makes it sustainable. And so for me, the reason that I've spent so much of my adult life doing these studies, and they're really hard to do, is that properly done and with the right collaborators and published in the leading journals and so on, they can redefine what's possible. And by doing so, it can give, at this point, literally millions of people new hope and new choices when they're hurting the most and they're the most open to change. Where the doorway, people say things like their suffering has been a doorway for transforming their lives. And it's an
Mhm.
opportunity that as a doctor, I wasn't really trained to do. I was trained to kill and bypass pain rather than to use that as a doorway.
I have to say, I can relate to that so much from anorexia. When I was coming through that, I really had a desire to not be restrictive about anything in my life ever again. That was kind of the goal. And as I moved over to whole food plants and veganism, so many people said, that's going to get you sick again. You're going to be, you're restrictive. And I just got to say it. It felt the exact opposite because I was now leading with my heart, and 5 times a day or 6 times a day, sitting down to eat, it was like this joy was bursting out of me, and I was the one that was in control of that, and creating that space for my heart. And yeah, never looked back. Obviously, and
That's
I can
beautiful.
really
I
relate to
mean,
that
so much of
space.
anorexia, as I understand it, way more about this than I do, is about control, and so much about
Mhm.
life in general. When I see people say, honey, you're not supposed to eat that, they just like they immediately want to do the opposite. It goes back to
Yeah.
the first dietary intervention, when God said don't eat the apple, and that didn't go so well, and that was God talking.
No, that was, and it was Eve's fault, so that's
That's
really
right. So yeah, I just find that even more than being healthy, people want to feel free and in control. And so the idea of doing these studies and this podcast really is just, to me, awareness is the first step in healing. So I appreciate
Mhm.
the chance to share this information.
Can we dive a little more specifically into the lifestyle changes that you suggest to work with people? You've distilled it, as Dotsie mentioned in the intro, in your latest book, Undo It, into 4 tenets: eat well, move more, stress less, and love more. But could we go more specifically? Because I've heard people say, "Oh, his program is too restrictive," and so, and we're talking about how it actually opens you up. So can you talk more specifically, eat well? What is the definition of that and moving more?
Yeah, the Undo It book that, as you mentioned, I co-author with my wife, Anne, and partner. We've been working together for 24 to 25 years now. Um, begins with one of my favorite quotes from Albert Einstein, which is, if you can't describe it simply, you don't understand it well enough. And so we kind of reduced it down to its essence, eat well, move more, stress less, love more. Steve Jobs was one of my closest friends for many decades, and he mastered that idea, with the iPhone. He would often say to me that he was more proud of what he left out of it than what he put in it. It's like
Mm.
supercomputer, but the interface is so friendly that, a 3-year-old can pick it up and use it. And so we tried to make the book like that too, that it was so easy. So the Eat Well is basically, if you're trying to reverse a disease, it's more prescriptive. It's the pound of cure, if you will, as opposed to the ounce of prevention. If you're just trying to stay healthy, lose a few pounds, what matters most is your overall way of eating living. So if you indulge yourself one day, it doesn't mean you cheated or you're bad or there are all these languages that have this kind of fascist quality to them. Once you call foods good or bad, it's a small step to saying I'm a bad person because I eat bad food. And at that point, might as well just bring out the cheeseburger because you're a bad person, right? But if you're trying to reverse a disease, it is hard. Again, that's why we were able to show that for the first time for so many of these different conditions, because most people didn't go far enough. So it's essentially a whole foods, plant-based diet. It's essentially a vegan diet. Fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, soy products, as close to possible as they come in nature. It's low in fat, but it's also very low in refined carbohydrates and concentrated sweeteners like sugar and high fructose corn syrup and so on. But as you know, within those, you can eat, whenever you want. You can eat until you're hungry. You don't limit the amount of food, just the type of food. And still people lose weight and they come down to what they weighed in high school or college, if that's what their ideal body weight was, and they level off. It works really well. The move more is, exercise. And for me to talk to you about exercise would be like, me talking to Michael Jordan about how to play basketball, or Steph Curry. But it's basically, what it comes down to for me is if you like it, you'll do it. So pick a kind of exercise you enjoy. And for me, I grew up in Texas where, running was always the preferred form of punishment. Go take a lap, or give me 50 push-ups, or whatever. But swimming was always fun. And so we moved into a house a couple of years ago that actually has a lap pool and it's heated, which is such a great luxury. So I've been swimming every morning because it feels like fun for me, as opposed to, I don't have to motivate myself to do it. It's just, fun. So pick something you enjoy or incorporate it into your life. I used to get frustrated when I couldn't find a parking place near the gym. I thought, well, this is ridiculous, so I parked deliberately farther away, those kinds of things. And so it's both aerobic and some resistance training. The stress less is various stretching, breathing, meditation techniques derived from yoga, but we do it in whatever form is comfortable for you. It can be religious, it can be secular. But it's more than stress management. It's about, again, quieting down our mind and body enough to experience that inner sense of peace and joy and well-being that's always there. And also to experience our own inner wisdom, our own inner teacher, our own inner guru or inner God or whatever you want to call it. It's that little voice that, wakes me up at 3 a.m. and says, hey, Dean, listen up, pay attention. You're not doing something that's in your best interest, or here's something you really ought to think about. And I've learned that I can access that more intentionally and directly when I can quiet down my mind well enough to hear it, because it speaks very clearly, but very quietly. It gets drowned out so easily. So at the end of a meditation, I have gotten in the habit of always asking my voice to say hello to me, and I'll say hello back. And I'll say, what am I not paying attention to that I need to? And listen, and it'll tell me. In fact, all of the ideas for doing the studies, including the most recent study on the reversing Alzheimer's, which we can talk about more in a moment, came from listening to that voice. So the stress less is not just managing stress better, but rediscovering our own inner sense of peace and joy and well-being and inner wisdom. And the love more is the part that people often have the hardest time with initially. They say, okay, I get the exercise, and of course you got to eat. It's just a question of what, but love more, that sounds so touchy-feely, and I'd get really defensive, and I'd say, oh no, look, this is hard science. Look at our, quantitative arteriograms and cardiac positron emission tomography and radionuclide ventriculography and SPECT/THAO and blah, blah, blah. And then one day I said, you know what? It is touchy-feely. And that's why it works so well, because we are touchy-feely creatures. We're creatures of community. That's how we've survived as a species, is to learn to love and take care of each other. And that's part of what concerns me today as things get so polarized and divisive, is that, that's really how we've survived as a species, is to learn to love and take care of each other. But to me, the real pandemic isn't just, COVID-19 or heart disease or type 2 diabetes. It's loneliness and depression and isolation, which I certainly understand from my prior experiences we talked about earlier. But also, with the breakdown of the social networks that used to provide people a sense of love and connection and community. 40 or 50 years ago, most people had an extended family they saw regularly. They had a neighborhood with 2 or 3 generations of people who grew up together. They had a job that felt secure, that they were, at for 10 years or more, got to know their coworkers. They went to these places called offices, and we're doing it all by Zoom. There was a church or synagogue or mosque or club or something they went to regularly where they connected with people. And today, many people don't have any of those. And one of the studies that Ann and I cite in our new book, in the Undo It book, is that the more time you spend on Facebook, the more depressed you are. And well, why is that? It's because it's not an authentic intimacy. It's like, it looks like everybody has this perfect life but you. It's like, here I am in front of the Eiffel Tower with my beautiful kids, and here I am, whatever. And people don't post their demons and their darkness and so on. Whereas if you grow up in an extended family with 2 or 3 generations of people, they really know you. They don't just know your Facebook profile or, the nice things you said about me when we introduced me. They know when you messed up. They know when you were suicidally depressed, or when you got busted, or when you, whatever, broke that window, or, and that they know, and they know that that they know, and they're still there for you. And there's something very primal about, I see you, like in James Cameron's, wonderful film Avatar, which is really from an African proverb. I see all of you. And to be seen in all of you, not just your good stuff, and still be loved and accepted, is profoundly healing. And so in our support groups, they're not just about helping people stay on the diet, as important as that might be. It's really trying to recreate that sense of authentic intimacy by creating a safe place where people can let down their emotional defenses and talk openly and authentically about what's really going on in their lives, without fear that someone's going to judge them or criticize them or blame them or give them glib advice on how they should do things better, but just to hear them and to connect with them. And at first, people, it's the most thing, people have the most apprehension about it. And yet once they do it, they say, well, okay, well, you're a doctor and you've done all these studies, and, and I say, yeah, this is really important. And they say, okay, well, I'll do it because you think it's important. But once they do it, and usually on the first or second group, even, it's so meaningful because, again, people, it's such a hunger that we have, a primal need for a connection and community that so often goes unfulfilled. It's why, even though people say, oh, it's so hard, as you mentioned earlier, it's people can't do this. Medicare is paying for 72 hours of training, which we divide into 18 4-hour sessions. So people come twice a week for 4 hours at a time, either before in person, now we can do it by Zoom. And they get an hour of exercise, an hour of meditation and stress management, an hour of a group meal with a lecture, but also an hour of the support group. And the support group is why we're getting 96% of the people finish all 72 hours. Now, to put that in perspective, only about a third of people who are prescribed statin drugs to lower your cholesterol are taking them just 4 to 6 months later. And that's just taking a pill once a day. And statins are of proven value for many people, and usually someone else pays for it, like insurance. And so you'd think that taking a pill would be easy and everybody would do it, and changing lifestyle to this dramatic effect will be really hard and no one would do it. And 96% of the people are doing this after 9 weeks, after 72 hours of doing it. And yet only a third of people are taking their statins. And the reason is that the statins don't make you feel better, but the lifestyle changes do. And so it's take this pill. It's not going to make you feel better. Hopefully it won't make you feel worse, to prevent something really horrible like a heart attack or stroke from happening years down the road that you don't want to think about. So you don't think about it. But when you change your lifestyle, you feel so much better so quickly. And that's why I love the Game Changers film that we were both in. That wonderful scene that Aaron Spitz did with the 3 guys and their erectile function. He gave them a single plant-based meal, and then they measured how the frequency and hardness of erections. These are athletes in their 20s, of erections they had at night when they slept. And then they gave them a single plant-based meal. I think it was a Beyond Meat meal or something. And they measured the same thing. And all 3 guys had 300 to 500% more frequent erections and 10 to 15% harder erections after one plant-based meal. So it kind of changes the whole equation from doing something today to prevent something bad from happening years down the road. Like, oh, what I gain is so much more than what I give up. And half of guys in their 50s have erectile dysfunction. It only goes up as you get older. 40% of guys in their 40s. But also, it's not just your sexual organs get more blood flow. Your brain gets more blood. You think more clearly. You have more energy. You need less sleep. Your heart gets more blood, and so on. So because these mechanisms are so dynamic, when you make big changes, paradoxically, and especially if you change a lot of things at the same time, which is also counterintuitive, it's actually often easier because you can then say, oh, when I do this, I feel good. When I do that, I don't feel so good. So let me do more of this and less of that,
Mhm.
because I'm choosing to do that, as you said before, not because someone's controlling me, because what I gain is so much more than what I give up in ways that are really meaningful.
Hey, do you know a kid who's always got a runny nose, stomach aches, or stubborn skin issues that just won't go away? Sometimes the answer is hiding in plain sight, like the milk in their glass or the cheese on their plate. At Switch for Good, we created the Kids program to help families uncover the connection between dairy and common childhood symptoms. It's completely free and packed with expert-backed tools, simple recipes, and printable resources that you can bring straight to your pediatrician. Every child has the right to good health and a brighter future. So whether it's your son or daughter, your grandchild, your niece or nephew, or even the little one that lives next door, this information changes lives. Explore the resources at kidsandmilk.org. Right on the homepage, it says, get your free resources. And I challenge you to take the first step and gather the toolkit we offer, or the education cards, or the waiting room brochures, and march them into a pediatrician office near you. All right, back to the episode.
For a few moments in this podcast so far on the idea of self-empowerment and what you learned from the shaman. My favorite line in the Game Changers was when you talked about, I think, which is just one of the most exciting aspects of your work, that your research has taught you that comprehensive lifestyle changes affect gene expression,
Yes.
turning on disease preventing genes and turning off genes that promote cancer and heart disease. And it's because it's so darn hopeful. It puts us in the driver's seat. It empowers us. It's no longer, Grandma Rose had it, so I'm doomed, and here we go.
Yeah.
And we think back to that generation and their genes, and maybe it was bad diet, but it was also very high stress. Our parents that survived the war. Take us deeper into that. I don't feel like I ever explain it as well as I want to when people say, Grandma Rose. So yes, would you do that?
Yes. Yeah. Well, so often people say, oh, I've just got bad genes. There's nothing I can do
Yeah.
about it, and
Mhm.
so, and yet you can, when I was in medical school, we were taught that the only way to change your genes is to change your parents, meaning you can't do anything about it. But we did a study with Craig Venter, who was the first to decode the human genome. And we found that over 500 genes were changed in just 3 months, same lifestyle changes, turning on the good genes, turning off the bad genes in simple terms. And there are mechanisms. There is something called methylation, which is a molecule that kind of acts like a switch that can turn on or turn off a gene. Technically, the genes are the same, but the expression of the genes, if you can turn off a gene that causes cancer, then it's as though you're changing your genes. Or
Yeah.
what are called different proteins, histone and non-histone proteins. They act as switches and sirtuins and others that turn on and turn off the genes. And we found that over 500 genes were changed in just 3 months. Now, I mentioned earlier that I've been working with President Clinton since 1993, right when he first became president. He's talked about this publicly. I wouldn't even mention it.
Right.
And about 14 years ago, after his bypass surgery, his had clogged up. One of his cardiologists, held a press conference on CNN and said, "Oh, it was all in his genes. His diet and lifestyle had nothing to do with it." And having been working with him for so long, I knew it had everything to do with it. So I sent the president an email. I said, "Look, the friends I value the most are the ones who tell me what I need to hear, not what I want to hear. And you need to know that it's not all in your genes." And I say that not to blame you, but to empower you. Because if it were all in your genes, you'd be a victim. And you're not a victim. You're one of the most powerful guys on the planet. And so he began making these changes, and he's still doing it. I communicated with him recently. He's getting better. And, it's whatever your politics, I think it's a great example that, especially someone who is known for eating, so much an unhealthful diet, if he can do it, then anybody can do it. But it's part of the bigger issue that in the Undo It book, I put forth this new unifying theory that, I was trained, like most doctors, to view heart disease, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, prostate cancer, breast cancer, Alzheimer's disease as being fundamentally different diseases, different diagnoses, and different treatments. And yet we found over these 4 decades that these same lifestyle changes we've been talking about can not only prevent, but often reverse the progression of all of these different conditions. And we're still looking into Alzheimer's. And so I'm thinking like it's kind of the opposite of this whole personalized medicine trend. Like, why is that? And I realize it's because they're not so different from each other. They all share the same underlying biological mechanisms, things like chronic inflammation, oxidative stress, changes in immune function, changes in overstimulation of the sympathetic nervous system, changes in the microbiome, the 100 trillion cells in our gut that coexist with us, and angiogenesis, and so on. And each one of these biological mechanisms, in turn, is directly influenced by what we eat, how we respond to stress, how much exercise we get, and how much love and support we have. Eat well, move more, stress less, love more. And so when you make these changes, and it also helps explain why we find what are often called comorbidities, that the same patient will have high blood pressure and high cholesterol and be overweight and have heart disease and so on, because they all are just different expressions of the same underlying disorder. Or why, as Colin Campbell showed in the China study, that entire countries, like in Asia 50 years ago, had such low rates of these chronic conditions until they start to eat like us and live like us. And now they die like us, more often than not with the same kind of conditions that we die from. And so it radically simplifies what we tell people, because it's not like there's one diet for heart disease, a different one for type 2 diabetes, or different for Alzheimer's, whatever. It's the same for all of them. And we're now in the middle of doing the first randomized trial to see if we can reverse the progression of early stage Alzheimer's disease, which I'm particularly interested in because my mom died of it and all of her siblings, and I have one of the ApoE4 genes for it. And when you lose your memories, you lose everything. And unlike these other conditions, there are other things you can do if you've got heart disease or diabetes that have benefit, but nothing really works for Alzheimer's. They've had one new drug approved in the last 20 years, and they spent billions and billions of dollars trying to find them. And the one drug that got approved, there's a lot of controversy around, called aducanumab, because it's one study showed it didn't do anything. The other showed it slowed down the rate of getting worse a little bit. About a third of people end up with brain hemorrhages, and it's $56,000 a dose, and so on. And so my belief is that we're at a place with Alzheimer's very reminiscent of where we were with heart disease 40 something years ago. In other words, back then, less intensive lifestyle changes slowed down the rate at which your arteries got clogged. We found more intensive ones could actually get them less clogged over time to reverse the disease progression. Ounce of prevention, pound of cure. It's hard to reverse disease. It takes a lot to do that. And likewise, the finger study and other studies have shown that the same lifestyle, it's good for your heart as it's good for your brain, and vice versa. Less intensive lifestyle changes can slow the rate of getting Alzheimer's. My theory is, again, that maybe more intensive ones might stop or reverse it. So we're still recruiting the last group of patients. And if anyone out there has early stage Alzheimer's, go to our website, ornish.com. We were forced to do the intervention by Zoom 2 years ago when COVID-19 hit. And to my great surprise, if anything good came out of COVID, it was learning that we could do it by Zoom as well as we do it in person. So now we're collaborating with the heads of neurology at Harvard and Mass General, at the Cleveland Clinic. Well, we soon hopefully do it at the Cleveland Clinic, but also we're doing it at University of California, San Diego, at Renown, as well as in the Bay Area, where they're recruiting and testing the patients locally, but we're delivering the intervention from our staff via Zoom. And then drop shipping the food to you. We're providing 21 meals a week for the entire 40 weeks of the intervention. So you can live pretty much anywhere and be eligible for the study. So I'm hopeful that we can show that. Time will tell. Whatever we show will be important. But if we can show that we can stop or even reverse it, that potentially could give millions of people new hope and new choices in an area that nothing else really is working in. So stay tuned.
I just have one specific question right on that. I'm wondering if the answer has to do in blood flow. This is like me pre-asking if I'm right. What would be the difference in a gene expression from meal of a sweet potato and a blueberry versus a cheeseburger? What will that sweet potato turn off maybe in a precancerous gene?
Yeah, I don't know that it's one meal or one item, but
or 10 sweet potato meals or 20, just like those food differences.
Yeah, well, there's something called the RAS family, RAS family oncogenes. Oncogenes are genes that promote cancer. And we found that we downregulated those, turned them off in this study. These are the genes that cause prostate cancer, colon cancer, breast cancer, just turned off within 3 months. Whereas we're turning on the genes that are healing. And we also turned off the genes that cause these same biological mechanisms that we've been talking about: chronic inflammation, oxidative stress, et cetera. We're just, turned off. The thing that continues to amaze me is how dynamic these changes are and how quickly people can get better or worse. We did a study with Elizabeth Blackburn, who got the Nobel Prize for discovering telomeres, the ends of our chromosomes that regulate aging. They're kind of like the plastic tips on the end of your shoelace to keep your shoelace from unraveling. They keep our DNA from unraveling, if you will. And as our DNA replicates over the years, telomeres get shorter and shorter. And as your telomeres get shorter, your life gets shorter, and the risk of premature death from all these different chronic diseases we've been talking about goes up proportionate to that. And she had done studies with Alyssa Epple showing that things, people who eat junk food, their telomeres get shorter faster. So there's people who are under chronic stress, women who are taking care of kids with autism, or people who smoke cigarettes, or who are sedentary, or whatever, their telomeres got shorter faster. So I said, if bad things make your telomeres get shorter faster, maybe good things make them longer. And so she said, no, I don't think so. I said, well, let's find out. So to her great credit, we did a study together, and we found for the first time that we could actually lengthen telomeres. And when we published this, the Lancet editor sent out a press release worldwide, and they called it First Study Showing that Lifestyle Changes May Reverse Aging at a Cellular Level. So whatever lens we look at this through, it just shows you, I think it's one of the reasons why a panel of experts from US News and World Report that rate diets every year, in January, a few months ago, rated what they call the Ornish diet as #1 for heart health, for the 11th year since 2011 that they began rating diets. That it's not just heart disease, though, it's all these different conditions because they're all interrelated.
You talked about being depressed when you were in college. Is that something that was that situational? Has it dogged you as an adult? And if so, how does lifestyle help depression? If not you, but maybe other people, how have you seen it?
Yeah, we've been collecting data on everyone who goes through our program. So we have data on well over 15,000 people. And we found that depression scores using a standard test for that are decreased by almost 50%, 50, by half. That's better than you get with antidepressants, but of course the only side effects of lifestyle changes are good ones. So depression has not been a problem for me because having kind of gotten as low as you could possibly get, I've learned, not to go to those places. I know them very well. They're unspeakably dark. The worst thing about being depressed, it's truly a reality distortion. The hallmark of depression, of feeling helpless and hopeless, is this belief that things are bad. They've always been bad. They'll always be bad. And anytime you thought otherwise, you were just deluding yourself. And if there's a power to evil, if you will, or darkness, it's to obscure the fact that the light drives out the darkness, metaphorically and literally. But the power of darkness is to make you believe that you don't have the power to do that. And so when someone says, only I can save you, or whatever, autocrat or whatever people are saying that kind of goes over to the reason it's called the dark side is that the power of darkness is to obscure the fact that we have a choice, and that, even a small, candle can drive out the darkness. We just need to remind ourselves that the light is there already, there was a spiritual teacher named Swami Vivekananda 100 years ago who came to the West, who was one of the first swamis to bring that to this country. And he said, it's as though you cover your eyes and you cry out that you're blind, And depression is like that. It's a reality distortion. You really think that that's where the hallmarks of depression, the helplessness and hopelessness come from, is the belief that things are bad, they'll always be bad, and they were always bad. And the only times you ever thought otherwise, you were fooling yourself. That's the power of darkness. And that's what we try to use our work to help dispel that. And again, what you're doing is to shine a light in the darkness. To me, awareness is the first step in healing, and the awareness that we have, that light is already there within us. We just need to stop obscuring it.
I was in Costco last night picking up medicine for my very sick dog. And I noticed in just over, surrounding the pharmacy, every single product seemed to be a product to help a symptom of something. There was eye drops for if your eyes are dry or itchy or painful. There was lots and lots of different types of ibuprofens. There was muscular rubs and icy hot and
antacids, right?
And then exactly. Yes. So, and I didn't walk any further because I was waiting at the pharmacy, but surrounding me was just everything to treat a symptom for something. And it got me thinking, about our conversation today, and knowing that you mentioned your work with President Clinton, his own health, but that you've also worked with Obama, and you were on that White House advisory group, Governor Newsom on the brain test on Alzheimer's disease prevention and preparedness. And I guess I'm just, it's obviously big business to deal with sick people, big business. But what have you seen change, and how much hope do we have for all the work that you've done, 43 years of it? And sometimes I feel like the doctors that I see, they've never heard of it. They don't know what I'm talking about. What I want to talk more hope.
Yeah,
And if you think this advice and these suggestions and the direction that you're talking about to us today are going to reach the masses.
yeah, well, it's a really good question. 86% of the $3.8 trillion we spent last year in this country for healthcare, which is mostly sick care, are for treating chronic diseases that are often not only preventable, but even reversible at a fraction of the cost. We did a study with Mutual of Omaha where we found that they saved almost $30,000 per patient in the first year, because almost 80% of people who were told they needed a stent or a bypass could choose my reversing heart disease program as a direct alternative. It was a lot cheaper. We did a study with Highmark Blue Cross Blue Shield. They found they cut their costs in half in the first year, and by fourfold in the first year when they looked at the subset of people that they'd spend at least $25,000 on in the prior year. So if we really want to make better care available to more people at lower costs, then we need to treat the cause, turn off the faucet around the sink that's overflowing, which to a much larger degree than I had once appreciated are the lifestyle choices we make each day. And so but when as I mentioned earlier, when someone's diagnosed with a life-threatening condition, there's an openness to change that, because it's like, well, it may be hard to change, but boy, I'm hurting so badly. Let me try this weird stuff. And then they start to feel so much better so quickly. Their chest pain, again, often goes away. And for someone who can't, walk across the street without getting chest pain, or make love with their spouse, or play with their kids, or go back to work without getting angina or chest pain, and usually within a few weeks they can do all those things, then they say, well, I like eating junk food, but not that much, because what I gain is so much more than what I give up. One of the patients I talk about in the Undo It book is a guy named Robert Treuherz, who's an internal medicine doc himself. And he had such a massive heart attack that his heart was pumping so poorly that he was told the only thing that could save his life would be a heart transplant. And he went through my program on reversing heart disease that we trained at UCLA for 9 weeks to get in better shape for the heart transplant while they were looking for a donor. And his heart disease improved so much in 9 weeks, he didn't need a heart transplant anymore. So what's the more radical intervention here? Getting a new heart, or eat well, move more, stress less, love more, besides the fact that it saves $1.5 million immediately, plus another, the fact that you're not on immunosuppressive drugs for the rest of your life. So I think we're at a place with the medical system that is broken, in the same way that it's a crisis. It's not sustainable in its current form. It's going to, bankrupt the GDP, which is too much. And trying to manage care and limit access and ration and so on is just not politically viable, and it's not really addressing just another form of bypass. We're not treating the cause. And so I'm optimistic by choice. Again, having chosen not to commit suicide, I am choosing to be optimistic because so much of that can be self-fulfilling in either direction. But also because I think there's evidence for that. Now that Medicare is paying for this, it's possible for doctors to make a living doing this. Again, if you change medical practice, you change reimbursement, you change medical practice, and even medical education. Lifestyle medicine is, to me, the fastest growing field in medicine today. I think it's the most exciting. Through the American College of Lifestyle Medicine and the Plantrition Conference and other groups like that, the International Plant-Based Nutrition Conference, I see a lot of hope here. And I think that, yes, darkness is rising in so many different areas of our lives, politically and otherwise, but so is the light. And again, the fact that it took me 16 years to work with Medicare to get them to cover our program, as I get older, my event horizon is getting longer. And so I think things actually are moving in a good direction. Are they moving as quickly as I would like? I mean, you have Eric Adams now, the mayor of New York, who's a vegan, who I've worked with. Cory Booker, who I've worked with, is a vegan. Adam Schiff is a vegan. Some of my favorite people are doing that. Some of the Snoop Dogg, the rapper, just came out with a vegan hot dog. It's becoming cool to be eat a plant-based diet. I think that the signs are everywhere that this is a trend that hasn't even been a wave that hasn't even begun to crest. So it makes me very optimistic.
Your Medicare, that's huge, having Medicare cover your program. And Dotsie and Switch for Good have been working to change the system in terms of the dietary guidelines. We talked about doctors changing you talked about the medical system changing how much nutrition they get in school. Are there any other systemic changes, because you've worked on these commissions and advisory groups and brain trusts with political, very high up in politics, where, and subsidies, of course, to dairy companies, that could change too? Are there any prescriptions you'd give to the government in terms of, or our maybe culture as a whole, so that we can systemically change the way we look at health?
I've been working for many, many years with the government advisory groups and informally and formally consulting with some of the key leaders on both sides of the aisle at the highest levels. I've also worked with a lot of CEOs of corporations. Back in 1999, I was giving a talk at the World Economic Forum in Davos, and I was introduced to Jim Skinner, who was the CEO of McDonald's at the time. And I said, you've got 43 million customers a day. You've got nothing on the menu that's healthy. You're going to be the next big tobacco. So for your own survival, you should have some healthy items on there, just so you can say, hey, we're giving people a spectrum of choice. And, for the what they call the veto vote, for the one person in the family that doesn't eat meat, you could give them something so the whole family doesn't go someplace else. So he agreed. And so I worked with them, and we developed these really wonderful salads, and they were really quite good. But it was very disappointing because of the subsidies, the meat is subsidized, the plant-based foods are not, and they also don't price in the real cost to society. So the salad was $5.95, the burger's 99 cents. So if you're on a fixed income, you get a lot more calories for your dollar by eating junk food, which made no sense. So they reduced the amount of salads on the menu to almost nothing. But then I worked with the heads of other major corporations to try to get them to make healthier foods. To some degree, that's working. But I think that more and more, there's an awareness in the government that we need to really look at what's causing this $3.8 trillion in healthcare costs. It is really mostly sick care costs. I've been working for many years to change the school lunch program. Neil Barnard has done some great work in that area too. I just think that there's, on the one hand, $100 billion were spent several years ago for stents and bypasses. The last year we have data on that are essentially, there are now 8 randomized trials that show that stents and angioplasties in stable patients don't work. They don't prolong life. They don't prevent heart attacks. They don't even reduce angina. They're dangerous, invasive, expensive, and largely ineffective. And yet something as simple as lifestyle changes can actually not only prevent, but even reverse a disease at a fraction of the cost. And as we talked about earlier, the only side effects are good ones. So I think there's more and more awareness of this. And to me, again, awareness is always the first step. So it's taking longer than I would like, but I do think things are moving in a good direction. Yeah, one of the things I loved about the Game Changers film is that it was kind of like what Elon Musk did for driving with a Tesla. Before it's like you had to choose between having a really powerful muscle car that was polluting or this kind of wimpy, Prius. Now you can have a car that's faster than a Ferrari that has no emissions at all. And I think the same is true in the Game Changers film. It's showing that it's not like you're a wimp if you eat a plant-based diet. It actually has just the opposite effects. It makes you, you can beat up people better. You can get an Olympic medal at age 39. You can, and how quickly those, your sexual performance improves. And so I think there's a growing awareness to get away from these false choices. Is it good for me? Is it fun for me? Am I going to live longer? Is it just going to seem longer? To say, actually, it's both. You can do all of this.
And also, I think we always it's odd that people talk about the restrictions in a plant-based diet, because if you look at folks who eat a conventional SAD diet, standard American diet, they don't, I wouldn't wager they eat much more restricted, and they choose not to indulge in all the wonderful things that we eat. I find that restrictive.
Yeah, it's true. Most people eat the same, 14 meals over and over again, is what studies are showing. But again, it's to me the big equation. I used to get into friendly arguments with Al Gore about this when An Inconvenient Truth came out. I said, you can scare people, and that's a very powerful motivator for like 4 to 6 weeks. When someone's first diagnosed with a heart attack, they'll do pretty much anything their doctor or nurse says for maybe 4 to 6 weeks, and then they stop. because we all know we're going to die. The mortality rate is still, 100%. It's one per person. But unless you're suicidally depressed like I was, or you've just been diagnosed with a life-threatening condition, you don't think about it most of the time. It's just too overwhelmingly scary. And so we tune it out. And so efforts to try to motivate people that are fear-based really are not sustainable. But joy and pleasure and love and feeling good really are. And when people realize that the quality of their life, that what you gain is so much more than what you give up, and how quickly within days to weeks you can experience that. That's why, again, I love that scene in The Game Changer. A single meal makes a difference. Then it really changes that whole equation for so many people. And what you've done, and to get an Olympic medal at 39 in one of the most challenging sports in cycling, I'm sure there are millions of people out there who owe their lives to you because you've redefined for them why to make these changes. Yes, you'll probably live longer, but if you told me when I was suicidally depressed I was going to live longer if I just made these changes, I'd say,
Yeah.
you
No
don't get it.
thanks.
I'm just trying to get through the day like so many people. They'll say things like, I've got 20 friends in this pack of cigarettes. You're going to take away my 20 friends? What are you going to give me? Or food fills that void, or fat coats my nerves and numbs the pain, or opioids numb the pain. We have an opioid epidemic, or alcohol numbs the pain. We have more people drinking than ever, or other drugs numb the pain, or working all the time is a more socially acceptable way of distracting yourself from that pain and loneliness, or video games are, a bigger business than movies are, and so we've learned that it's not enough to just give people information and expect them to change. I mean, it's not like I say, excuse me, Miss Jones, I want you to quit smoking. Did you know it's bad for you? They go, well, I didn't know. I'll quit today. It's like everybody knows it's a pack of cigarettes,
Right.
and so we can't just focus on the information or the behavior, but to work on these deeper issues. And when we work on that level, the loneliness, the depression, the isolation, we find that people are much more likely to make and maintain lifestyle choices that are life enhancing than ones that are self-destructive.
I'm working on a book right now, and it's part of it is about kind of the deconstruction of the female body from war to peace in the female body. And I've been doing a lot of research and some writing on thinking on our three brains, our brain in our head brain, and our heart brain. It's an actual little brain in our heart, which I know but I didn't. And the gut brain, which is comprised of up to about 600 million neurons. And so I'm very curious about the gut brain, because that's what that's where the food goes, right? Put it in their mouth, heads down to the gut to do all of its wonderful or not so wonderful things, depending on what you put in. Do you think that what we eat, not just how much more we love or how much more we move or how much less stress, but literally the food that goes in our gut brain has a lot or a little to do with depression and sadness, or pleasure and contentment?
Yeah, I think it's, not even just the gut or the heart or the brain. I think every cell really has its own intelligence. And that, our bodies will let us know, I mean, the fact that we're showing 50% reductions in depression in people who make these lifestyle changes, more than you get with, SSRIs like Zoloft or Xanax. I mean, not Xanax, Prozac are emblematic of that. And again, we're just beginning to learn, we have 100 trillion cells in our gut, the microbiome, that are not really us, that are just we have more cells that are not us than are us, that are residing there. And the proportion of which cells are making up those 100 million really can have a big impact on whether we stay healthy or whether we get sick. There was a study that came out, actually two studies that came out in the last couple of months. One of looking at frontline COVID healthcare workers. There are almost 3,000 of them in 6 different countries, including the US. And they found that those that ate a plant-based diet were something like 73% less likely to get moderate to severe COVID. Those on a pescatarian who ate fish were 59% less likely. And those on an Atkins, paleo, high animal protein, keto diet were 400% more likely to get moderate to severe COVID. And there was another study that came out in almost 600,000 people at a King's College in London and at Harvard with Walter Willett's group. And they found again that there was those eating a predominantly plant-based diet we're like 43% less likely to get moderate to severe COVID. Now, a lot of people don't know that. And it's important because we now know that even if you're triple vaccinated, you're still only about 80% protected. And so people say, what else can I do to enhance my immune function? Well, this is something that you can do that can really make a big difference. And again, it's because of the gut really controls so much more of our health than we have really really understood until recently.
Folks, it's in the book, Undo It, a very optimistic and inspiring treatise on how we can all get healthier and feel better. And as you said, love is very much a part of the book. And I know that that's not in a lot of health books that we talk about. So it's really important that people read this version, which has been updated to talk about COVID.
Well, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to share what we've been learning all these years, and thank you for inspiring me and your amazing work. And I hope at least some of this has been useful. If anyone wants more information, just go to our website, ornish.com, whether it's about enrolling in our Alzheimer's study or the reversing heart disease program that's now offered virtually, or more about the book, or there's all kinds of information on how to change your lifestyle. Everything in there is free. And if I seem overly passionate about this, it's because I've just, it really brings meaning to my life. And so I'm grateful every day to be able to do this work. So thank you for this opportunity.
It's an honor, such an honor. And you've been amazing. So
Thank
thank you.
You too.
For every word.